In this video, we will break down the logistical, medical, and psychological reality of prostitution in the European and Pacific theaters of World War II, based on citation of official Surgeon General reports, provost marshal records, and divisional medical logs. We're strictly examining how the command structure managed a biological drive that threatened combat effectiveness as severely as enemy fire. For the uninitiated observer, the history of the war is often sanitized into maps, arrows, and speeches. It is easy to view the soldier as a robotic unit of force. But for those who have worn the uniform, or for those who study the granular reality of deployment, you know the truth is messier. You know that a division is a collection of thousands of young men in their physical prime, removed from social constraints, facing imminent death. That creates a specific psychological and biological pressure. When that pressure is not managed, discipline fractures. This is not a discussion about morality. This is a briefing on maintenance. Just as a tank requires fuel, and a rifle requires oil, an army requires morale management. During World War II, the most pervasive threat to the human terrain was not always the Wehrmacht or the Imperial Japanese Army. It was venereal disease, VD. In 1941, the admission rate for venereal disease in the U.S. Army was 42.5 per 1,000 men per year. By the end of the war, despite massive prophylactic campaigns, hundreds of thousands of man-days were lost. A soldier in a hospital bed recovering from syphilis is tactically identical to a casualty struck by shrapnel. He is not on the line. The command knew this. They did not view prostitution through a lens of Puritanism, but through the lens of logistics. If you suppress the urge entirely, you risk mutiny or psychological breakdown. If you allow it unchecked, you lose regiments to infection. The solution was a cold, calculated system of regulation, controlled zones, and authorized prophylactic stations. This was a war fought with penicillin and condoms just as much as it was fought with garrons and grenades. We're going to walk through the mechanics of this system. We will look at the designated brothels in North Africa, the pan-pan girls of the Pacific, and the grim medical reality of the pro station. This is the unsanitized operational history of how the military attempted to regulate human nature to keep the war machine moving forward. The primary mechanism for managing this biological friction was the pro station, short for prophylactic station. Every unit commander was required by Army Regulation 4210 to establish these facilities in accessible areas, often near the exits of leave centers or designated red light districts. The logic was binary, exposure was inevitable, infection was optional. To the soldier on a 48-hour pass, the pro station was a grim final stop on the night's itinerary. Inside, the procedure was clinical, humiliating, and mandatory. If a soldier contracted a venereal disease and could not prove he had visited a pro station or used an individual chemical prophylactic packet, commonly known as a VPAC, he faced court-martial. Under the 107th Article of War, time spent in the hospital for VD was classified as not in line of duty. You lost your pay for every day you were bedridden. You were effectively fined for getting sick. The VPAC itself was a triumph of utility over comfort. Contained within a small cardboard box were a cloth bag, a soap-impregnated cloth, and 2 tubes of ointment. One tube contained silver protein, a strong antiseptic. The other contained calomel ointment, a mercury chloride compound. The instructions were graphic and specific. The soldier had to inject the silver protein directly into the urethra and hold it there for 5 minutes. This caused a burning sensation, often described as urinating liquid fire. Following that, the calomel ointment was rubbed over the exterior genitals. The area was then wrapped in wax paper to protect the uniform. This was not a medical suggestion. It was a tactical drill performed in latrines and alleyways across Europe and the Pacific. Despite these draconian measures, the biological reality of millions of displaced men collided with the wreckage of local economies. In Naples in 1943, the collapse of civil order meant that sex became a primary currency. A can of C-ration Spam or a pair of nylon stockings could purchase intimacy. The transactional nature of these encounters made contact tracing nearly impossible for the provost marshal. According to the Medical Department, United States Army, in World War II, preventive medicine, the statistics paint a picture of a force under siege by microbes. In the early stages of the North African campaign, specifically November 1942 to May 1943, the VD rate skyrocketed. In some units of the Fifth Army, rates hit 120 cases per 1,000 men per year. That is over 10% of the fighting. Strength compromised not by German artillery, but by gonorrhea and syphilis. Declassified reports from the Office of the Surgeon General indicate that during the build-up to D-Day in the United Kingdom, the sheer volume of man-days lost terrified logistics planners. In 1943 alone, the U.S. Army and the European Theater of Operations, ETO, reported huge spikes in infections. To combat this, the Quartermaster Corps didn't just ship bullets, they shipped latex. By 1944, the Army was distributing over 50 million condoms per month. The monthly Prophylactic report became as critical to a divisional commander as his ammunition status report. If a company's VD rate climbed too high, the company commander was relieved for failure to maintain command health. The virus was treated as a breakdown in discipline, and the spreadsheet was the judge. The reality of the infection was far removed from the sterile statistics in Washington. For the soldier on the ground, the short arm inspection became a ritual, as routine and dreaded as cleaning a rifle. Once a month, sometimes weekly, depending on the division's infection rate, a company would be halted. The order, fall in, was followed by the command to unbutton trousers. A medical officer or a senior medic would walk the line. The commands were curt and mechanical. Skin it back, milk it down. Hundreds of men stood exposed in the cold mud of France or the humid rot of the Philippines, submitting to a genital examination in full view of their peers. There was no privacy. There was only the biological inventory of the unit. If a soldier was flagged, he didn't just disappear. He entered a cycle of rudimentary and painful treatment. Before penicillin became widely available in 1944, the treatment for gonorrhea involved heavy doses of sulfadiazine or sulfathiazole. These were not benign pills. They crystallized in the kidneys. If a soldier didn't drink massive amounts of water, often difficult in combat conditions, he risked renal failure. He would be pulled off the line, not for a wound, but to be flushed with fluids while his unit moved out without him. For syphilis, the regimen was darker. Arsenic and bismuth compounds were injected over weeks. The side effects included severe nausea, gum damage, and tremors. Men described the sensation of the silver treatment, the urethral injections mentioned in the manuals, as a hot wire being pushed inside them. The physical mechanics of the cure were often described as worse than the disease itself. In the Pacific, the environment compounded the misery. In the sweltering heat of New Guinea, the groin area was already a breeding ground for fungal infections, jungle rot. Adding a venereal infection created a complex necrosis that could sideline a man for months. This biological threat directly altered operational behavior. Commanders began treating local towns not just as tactical objectives, but as biohazards. Off-limits signs were posted with the same authority as minefield warnings. The military police, MPs, weren't just looking for saboteurs. They were patrolling controlled zones, physically dragging soldiers out of unauthorized brothels. The psychological impact on the unit was immediate and corrosive. A squad is a closed ecosystem. If the bar, Browning automatic rifleman, gets sent to the rear for VD, someone else has to carry that heavy weapon. Someone else has to walk point. Resentment builds. The soldier in the VD ward wasn't viewed as a victim. In the eyes of his platoon, he was a gold brick, someone avoiding duty. Tactically, this forced officers to become accountants of vice. The VD rate became a metric of leadership. High rates meant restricted passes, canceled leaves, and more frequent humiliating inspections. The fear of the disease morphed into a fear of the administrative hammer. Men would hide infections, self-treating with black market sulfa powder, allowing the bacteria to fester and spread, turning a manageable medical issue into a chronic, debilitating condition that eventually required evacuation. The irony was sharp. The Army provided the condoms and the stations to keep men safe, but the punitive culture often drove the infection underground, making the entire machine less efficient. When the treaties were signed and the divisions were demobilized, the statistical legacy of this biological conflict remained. The U.S. Army had treated millions of cases of venereal disease. It had distributed hundreds of millions of prophylactics. It had effectively engineered a massive public health infrastructure on foreign soil, not out of benevolence, but out of the necessity to keep riflemen on the firing line. The introduction of mass-produced penicillin in the final years of the war changed the tactical landscape. What was once a career-ending, debilitating sentence became a manageable infection. But the psychological scar tissue remained. Thousands of men returned home to the United States with medical records they would never discuss with their wives or families. The greatest generation is often remembered for its stoicism, but that silence was often purchased with the shame of the pro station and the fear of the short arm inspection. For the insider, the history of World War II is not just the movement of armies across maps. It is the memory of the waiting room, the smell of antiseptic, and the cold logic of a command structure that viewed human intimacy as a supply chain variable. We acknowledge the reality of their service, not just the combat, but the maintenance of the human machine in an environment designed to destroy it. This was the war as it was lived, stripped of the parade uniform.